Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
There are lots of tools out there. The question, of course, becomes is what is your strategy? How much value you place on home delivery and how you approach your e-commerce in a holistic way, not only from the customer experience standpoint, but from the fulfillment and the back office standpoint as well.
Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. This episode, Ninad and I welcome Ina Kuznetsova, CEO of ToolsGroup. Ina has built her career bringing technology and AI-based innovation into supply chain. Prior to assuming her role at ToolsGroup in May of 2022, Ina served as CEO of 1010 Data, the leading provider of cross-enterprise data analytics tool. Her roles before 1010 Data include being president and chief operating officer at INTTRA, now part of E2 Open, the chief commercial officer of CEVA Logistics, and the global VP marketing and sales system software at IBM, where she spent 19 years. She's earned an MS, MBA, and PhD. She's a frequent speaker on technology-driven innovation and the author of not one, but two best-selling career books, and has been awarded the Women in Supply Chain Award for 3 years in a row. What an awesome background. We are truly excited for this conversation. Thank you for being with us here today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Dan. I'm honored to be here and talk to you.
I got to say, so our friend Radu, who's been a really good friend of us here at the podcast, we are a huge fan of him. When you recommended your profile, that we should be talking to you to bring you on as a guest, and we started looking at the profile, and I was like, okay, this profile is not stopping. One after the other, high profile positions, high profile roles, success in a lot of different positions. It is absolutely an honor to have you here, and really looking forward to our conversations.
It is difficult to stop if they offer you a possibility to focus on two passions in life, AI and supply chain at the same time.
Exactly.
I have to admit, when I was actually putting your intro together, I actually had to cut out more than I had in there because it is so extensive. And you really, truly have one of the most impressive backgrounds of anyone we've ever brought onto the show. As much as you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you the moments during your professional journey that were the most impactful. And as you climbed the supply chain leadership ladder, what was your North Star? Meaning, like, what philosophies or principles did you stay true to that helped you as you rose throughout the ranks?
I spent the first 19 years of my career after the university in technology space. Started it in Russia and then moved to the US, IBM headquarters. And I always focused on either fast-growing opportunities, such as Linux space or life sciences, a little bit on M&A, or went to the areas where technology intersected with business, and the business maybe stopped or flatlined and needed some reset strategically to get growing. At some point, a recruiter reached out and offered me to leave IBM, which first seemed like a heresy for someone who spent 19 years in the same environment. Right. And what really attracted me was the opportunity to learn supply chain, because I did understand how, from my perspective, computer technology and software could help businesses advance. I've never been on the other side. And we all know that it's always in the eyes of the beholder. So I made a leap and decided that's a great opportunity for me to learn supply chain, logistics, shipping, contract logistics, while making a difference, right? And coming in, doing what I do, helping to restructure and get back to growth a large sales organization, while spending a couple of days every month in operations, in different parts of operations, following a box in an airport, or going to the shipping terminal, or going to our tracking and freight forwarding operations, or doing an inventory planning at contract logistics. So working with industrial engineers, basically observing how they design a conveyor for the packaging. All of this was very exciting for me. I think a special thanks should always be said to the CEO who said, well, I have 50,000 people who know logistics. I have 6 candidates, of which 5 come with a traditional 20 years in logistics requirement. And I have a very weird one who is a woman from a different country. And she knows account management and CRM usage and sales compensation and strategy, but never stepped her foot into logistics facility. So he said, if you have so many degrees, if you are game to learn, then yeah, let's do that. And I thought, well, it's one thing I know how to do. I know how to learn. So I spent the next few years learning. And one thing that I have learned in logistics was how underserved logistics was and still is, to be very honest, when it comes to technology, because where people who have spent their lives in shipping and contract logistics see boxes and purchase orders and numbers, I see bits and bytes of information. And one of those 2 visions is just a hub, right? Because there is a reason why that industry is underserved in terms of technology. But when you bring those 2 together, you can create a difference. You can create an impact. And a big revelation moment was coming to an IT conference, which was full of my former colleagues and my former competitors, whose message in different shape or forms was just give us $500,000 and we will figure how you shippers can increase your profitability. And the shippers were saying, unless you have a solution for me, and I have $500,000, I would rather buy more trucks.
Yeah.
Because then I know how to increase my profitability.
Right.
Rather than who knows what you guys will learn because you don't understand our industry. So I spent the rest of my career bringing those 2 knowledge together as much as I could, or bringing people from both worlds together and creating environment for them to collaborate, to bring technology and bring innovation into supply chain. So that's my career in a nutshell. And I've done it while raising through career tracks and serving on external boards. And I enjoy all of it, but I think that's just the form. The content is how you bring technology to improve the efficiency, profitability, customer service, response, reaction time in all aspects of supply chain.
Very, very well said. Some of the things that you just mentioned, specifically around how underserved the supply chain market happens to be. Even though we see so much innovation, like if I was to think about outside of, business to consumer businesses, right? Like the B2C operation, when you kind of get into B2B businesses, it just seems like logistics, specifically within the supply chain space, is just like ripe for opportunities for technology, because the amount of paper-based work that actually happens today, the amount of manual work that happens today. And yes, the enterprises have good solutions, but when you start going down market from the enterprises, you see that big drop in the technology adoption within this particular arena. Now, yeah, of course, the robots are coming in and there is a whole bunch happening within the space, but it just seems like we are just in its infancy for how much we can do within the space. It's super exciting. And one of the things, just to go down one of the subject areas we want to talk to you about is we recently worked on impacts of AI in the logistics environment, right? Specifically on the real estate side. And will it reduce the amount of footprint or will it increase the amount of footprint? There was a bunch of questions that came up. So we kind of went through a research exercise. And the single most important thing from a warehousing and logistics standpoint, where AI can truly reshape, is the demand planning aspect of things. Because the demand planning aspect has the ability to reduce the inventory turns that a warehouse needs to do. That means how much storage you require, etc. And also, from a profitability, how much cash flow do you have on hand? How much, goods do you have on hand, etc. And so it's not things that happen inside the warehouse, but the planning aspect of what goes inside the warehouse. So could you kind of explain, because that's where, your recent focus area has been. How is the industry evolving today, right? Like how is AI being used in demand planning today? Because I remember my olden days where demand planning used to be batch jobs running on Unix servers for all night long for us to produce some sort of plan the next day. And then humans working on it until 4 p.m. to submit the purchase orders that would end up going out. I'm guessing all of that has changed. And again, I'm not on that side of the universe and would love to know how enterprises are addressing that. How is AI playing a role within that space?
Ninad, I think you're absolutely right that the first area where AI and technology can help is demand forecasting. I think it goes beyond that. It's not the only way. The next part would be being smarter in all aspects of execution, from assortment plannings to replenishments and allocations to order management and fulfillment. And most of all, recently, pricing and markdowns optimization, because with the speed of changes in the economy, one kind of offsets the other. So I would say it starts with the demand forecasting. It goes into tight integration and collaboration between planning and execution. And then all aspects of planning and execution can also benefit from the tightening up. But let us start talking about demand forecasting, because I agree with you. If you plan wrong from start, you already created a lot of problems, and there is no lack of problems in supply chain and logistics these days. So why not decrease the initial amount if we can? Planning for supply chain starts with taking into account a lot of different factors. And I think today, depending on whom you're talking to, you can hear that it's getting alternative data that helps. It's tracking social media and understanding demand trends that helps. It's tracking past purchases that helps. And if I step aside and look at that, not as a vendor of a particular solution, but as a supply chain player, I would say it's all of the above. And what models do you use to take that information into account? So yes, the more data you have, the better, but do you have the tools that properly process this data? The reason why I was so attracted to ToolsGroup, why I left my previous role to jump into this current journey, was because ToolsGroup was a pioneer in using machine learning in demand forecasting, which they started doing 15 years ago. And I'm saying they rather than me because I was not there. I was doing other things at the time. But the ToolsGroup already pioneered not just the use of machine learning, which is factoring the knowledge every day and trying to use past behavior to predict the future, but it created a different model from what the rest of the market used. And until today, that remains the secret sauce and unique feature. It is the probabilistic model. And the probabilistic model does not give you one answer of how many boxes do you need of whatever item at whatever location. It tells you with what probability, how much of those would you need.
Right.
It factors risks as you go, right? So the good way to describe it is, it's like taking an umbrella with you. Should you take an umbrella with you when you go in the morning? 50% yes or no. But then you look out and it's not sunny today. So maybe it's 60% that I need it. Then you switch on the weather forecast and they say 60% of rains in that area. Say, probably 80% probability I need an umbrella to feel safe. That's a very simple example, but it describes how we predict of how much product, whether it's spare parts or raw material or anything that comes in boxes and in packaging and hits our cross-dock of shipping or warehouse or plant, right? How much of what do we need where? It includes even food for airlines or cruises, right? Same thing, right? You have different factors impacting how much of what item you need. And you can change that forecast day after day because you can start factoring into their data. The best thing about artificial intelligence is not only it can process more SKUs than any of human brain can process. And especially if you have a very long tail of rarely used items, that becomes a very important issue, right? If 99% of everything you sell comes from the same 10 products, you probably can do it in Excel. If we're talking about 3 million SKUs and more, as many of our customers have, and a very high amount of working capital being locked in that long tail, which you may not be even shipping out every month, but need to have, and you add high interest rates on top, you suddenly find yourself in a situation that if you misforecast that long tail, you may end up with working capital locked in for months and even years before you can offload those items, right? Then what do you take in as risks? That's another advantage that AI can take over human being. You don't need to reflect on, oh, this supplier is systematically late, right? Because everyone can forecast in a sterile, perfect, ideal conditions. The world is not perfect. The world has shipping delays and good suppliers and bad suppliers, but unfortunately, the only suppliers you can use are suppliers that are needed because of risk management, or suppliers who suddenly play a bigger role because of a conflict zone. So you start factoring in the factors as they come, like in my story about the umbrella, and you start adjusting that probability. Then the second step is, in the end of the day, you have to order, right? And items rarely come in one by one item. Items usually come in boxes. They may come in boxes of 5 or 500. So setting that decision for how many boxes of 500 do you need, if the probability of selling 500 is here, right? The projected service level is here, becomes kind of an art. In the reality, it's not an art, it's a mathematics, right? It's figuring out 90% probability is I need 300 items and I have a box of 500 to buy. So I can be either 300 items short or 200 items too high. And there is certain probability in between. Then the question to you is, how would you like to set the system? Because for some items, you will say it's absolutely okay for me to be 200 items high because I ship that item every week and I will get my money back. I'll just ship it late. I will adjust it next week. For other items, it means you will be stuck with 200 items for the next year, right? And so there is also the service level question. What service level would you like to meet? Because you may have some very strategic customers and you would rather be stuck with that small box of 200 items that miss on a very strategic order and get dropped from being a supplier to the very strategic customer. In another case, it may not be such an important item. It may be something you don't really ship to big customers and you will be okay for it. So finding that perfect intersection of the supply chain curve and inventory curve for each particular item at each particular location, using the mathematical probability of them meeting at that point, is what AI is doing in a ToolsGroup solution. And what our several hundred customers are using. And a lot of them actually told us they were able to substantially reduce the bullwhip effect during COVID because they were able to constantly factor risks even before they could articulate that risks, right? The growing lead time, the suddenly increasing issues with the supplier, those things were factored in as daily risks. And as a result, they got better precision forecasting and also could manage the probability of meeting certain service.
And so very well said, right? And amazing explanation. I do have to point out though, from a e-commerce perspective, right? Like at the end of the day, when we look at demand forecasting, you're forecasting for, variables that are being input in machine learning models or eventually any stream of AI. It's data that it actually consumes, right? From a retail replenishment standpoint or demand standpoint, you can kind of see that the variables, of course, there is variability of how the peak is going to be this year. And you got to start planning in June or July for how peak this year might be, or even earlier in some cases. E-commerce has such wild variability, right? Like what we see from a brand perspective is they are, and I'm not even talking about like small brands. I'm talking about brands that might be doing $200, $300, $500 million in GMV on an annual basis, and their inability to forecast. Is AI helpful there? Are we seeing like where AI can truly start narrowing it down? Because I can tell you as an industry, we went through a horrible time last year, specifically on the e-commerce side with the excess demand that we had. right? The warehouses were bursting through the seams, products weren't leaving. We are starting to see some of the fire sales this year. You're picking up, premium products from last year right now at like 70% discount. I'm loving it because I made some purchases, but that's actually happening this year. And that is the ripple effect of over planning last year that we are facing today, which means there was less buying this year, right? Like, do you have a perspective on that? Like, would AI prevent this in the future if folks are actually utilizing demand planning using AI? And can it take variables of that nature into consideration, this type of volatility that we saw over the last couple of years?
So as a consumer, I really love 70% discount.
Exactly.
I just bought presents for my whole family and friends for Christmas over the early Black Friday. And what it tells me is how fragile the retail industry is. So as a consumer, I don't want my favorite brands to go out of business.
Exactly.
Now, stepping out from the consumer shoes into the shoes of a partner to retail planners, I would say that no technology can elevate all the problems, right? I will start here, right? Someone who tells you all your problems will forever go away is on a religious mission, right? Technology, as any science, has certain limitations in implementation. You cannot remove the risk, but you can reduce the risk, right? So we can talk about how you can reduce the risk, and you can reduce it in many different ways. First of all, let us talk about assortment planning. Assortment planning, in many cases, especially if you think about apparel, or if you think about packaging for cosmetics, or if you think about accessories, it's not just about the models, right? It's about what is the mix of colors, what is the mix of men and women apparel, right? What is the mix of sizes? And then when you come to footwear, what is the mix of half sizes that you need to have? And that become very, very tricky because in the end, you may have all the right models, but you miss on the right sizes and you have excessive inventory. It may also become tricky because you think you don't have an inventory and you solve the problem when in reality you missed a lot of sales. We had a real situation with one of the large footwear retailer who implemented our Just Enough solution for retail planning. The solution replaced 12 different systems. It was a very complex, multi-month implementation. And during Black Friday, we forecasted 2 million more pairs to be sold. And the retailer said, no way. We know how we do year to year. And that was before COVID, right? So we're not even talking about that level of disruption. We know how we do. We always come with reasonable inventory. How much can you reduce our inventory? But 2 million, that would be excessive, right? The person who was the sponsor of the implementation said, well, we spent so much time and so much effort implementing this thing. Let's just get the answer once and for all. Is it working or not? And they believed it and they sold 2 million more pairs.
Wow.
And think about it and think about all the missed demand because you do not know how much demand you miss. The customer came on your site and you did not have my half size and I go to a different site and I buy something else, right? And you missed my demand, but you do not see it in your year-to-year figures. So understanding planning can certainly help retailers when they plan assortments. Another very important thing to mention is allocation. If I ask retail planners, what are the top 10 best-selling products? Any planner knowing their business will say, that's not a big deal. I can tell you exactly. Those are the top 10 items. And we will say, well, how do you allocate those items to your stores? And this is where you probably start hearing about 20% being left in the warehouse. And the rest will be kind of allocated proportionally to revenue. Or we cluster by rural and urban, or we cluster by small and big. And this is approximately how we do it. So in the end of the day, we will be left with excessive inventory in one and lack or unfinished demand in the other. And it's not a given that the consumer will go from one store to another store, right? And also if the customer is buying online, it's not a given that whatever supply you allocated to your e-commerce unless you have shipment from stores as a possibility, which we'll come to, that will happen, right? We have a customer who has a store selling sports and leisure apparel in a resort area, in really upscale resort area. So during summer months, they make 75% of all their revenue, which is what usually happens at Christmas time in the area where I live, right? But then, of course, Christmas comes and locals don't need that very expensive leisure brand. And Christmas is an empty month for them. How do you cluster that store? How do you allocate to that store? And the only right answer is you need to know how much of what product to what store on SKU, model, and color level. And that, of course, implies the level of complexity that no Excel table or human brain can sustain. And this is where our friend AI steps in. That's another story. That's the allocation plan, right? And then in general, what we can do with the help of technology today is factor all the risks, including weather forecasts, right? Including last minute changes, and make those allocation changes last minute. And we will talk more about it when we talk about the trends. But I will make one last point. The next area where the machine learning can help tremendously is all aspects of order management and price optimization, right? So you've done your planning and your forecasting to the best of your ability. You allocated as much as you could. And suddenly the hurricane changed its path and you have 2 weeks of bad sales, right? Or social unrest happened, or something else that changed the situation, or even the climate stayed nice for longer. We had nice, very warm fall. So when the back to school event happened, people psychologically bought less sweaters and more t-shirts. And you have all that huge collection, all this amount that is not moving in time. So what do? First of all, with the help of machine learning, you can fulfill better from the stores, right? It's not just fulfillment from the warehouse. You'll be much more efficient fulfilling from a store where that item may be marked down by 50% tomorrow, even if it costs you a little bit more in shipping. But that requires a different technology. And the second is also very important, intelligent optimization and markdown. There is no need to mark down everything but 75% if you can get away with marking something by 30.
Yep.
And as you think about your markdowns, think about the combinations and items that are often sold together. In a simple example, you don't want to mark down bottoms and tops of a swimming suit in such a way that you end it up with just bottoms and just tops on the sides, right? But in a more complex situation, you usually have certain collections, a certain affinity of products, the products that are often sold together. So you can think about more intelligence optimization of the pricing. And that again requires AI. And again, that may save you just a few points of profitability, which is so precious for retailers.
So this is really good, right? Like, so demand planning, you got allocation control, right? Like that AI is helping with. Is AI touching transportation dynamic route planning? Because usually what happens is those orders, right, which end up being outbound orders into logistics centers, go drop into the warehouse management system, or there is a transportation management system that's doing cubed planning for how the route is going to work, right? Multi-stop, delivery model. Are we starting to see where that those components of, because allocation's already happening in these systems, why aren't the allocation systems also determining route planning to say, this is the most optimal way you should be shipping, taking some of that TMS functionality out of the TMS and let's call it into these, planning tools?
Different retailers use a different approach to this last mile delivery.
Right.
It may be based on AI, it may be based on other technology. I think the point is that it has to be intelligent, right?
Yep.
It has to be thought through. I will give you an example of Target, who uses logistics innovation, right? So they created sortation centers that are located closer to the big groups of population. And when you order an item, the items can be fulfilled either from a warehouse or from the store. That gives you the flexibility of choose the best delivery. If you fulfill from the store, the items start clogging the back rooms. So the sortation centers accept items from several stores, and then some items will be delivered locally, but in a bigger truck. And that, of course, creates the economy of scale.
Yep.
I'm sure there are routes optimization. I'm sure there are street turns, the things that people have been doing for years, right? That's not new in logistics. And then other goes through UPS and FedEx, right? But those sortation centers, this is the logistics innovation on Target's side, and they've been quite efficient in using that. Other retailers look at the more holistic approach to e-commerce altogether, and rather than creating a special warehouse-based delivery, look at enabling delivery from the stores. And that, of course, creates the need to connect your order management system to transportation management system, to manage cross-docks well, to manage the network, right? A whole new approach. And most of all, to making your fulfillment dynamic, right? What factors are you taking into account when you plan the route or when you plan the fulfillment location? Because again, it may not always be based on the shipping costs. It may be based on labor costs, on upcoming markdowns and everything else, right? So it's there is a complex set of tools out there, and retailers achieve amazing results. Belk recently did a webinar talking about using dynamic fulfillment from ToolsGroup and showing how they save millions on delivering from stores with the help of that package. There are lots of tools out there. The question, of course, becomes is what is your strategy? How much of value you place on home delivery, and how you approach your e-commerce in a holistic way, not only from the customer experience standpoint, but from the fulfillment and the back office standpoint as well.
Absolutely. And one of the most important things, scale, right? Like, depending on how much scale do you have, we like to call the hyper giants, right? Like the Targets, the Walmarts, the Amazons, right? The volumes that they process. That's why you get to see the amount of innovation. Fortunately, and it's a great point that you brought up Target, because I've done a lot of work with Target. I spent, 6-7 years of my life working close to both the e-commerce model as well as their retail model. And you look at just 10 years ago, what their network used to be versus what it happens to be today, night and day, complete difference, right? Like we were talking about continuous flow. I can tell you their e-commerce model, their e-commerce warehouse was actually treated like a store. So the retail warehouse would consider this allocation was happening like as what it was allocating to a store. Complete different model versus today, them getting into the sort centers, getting closer to the consumer. These sorts actually both going down the route of retail fulfillment as well as direct to consumer fulfillment from these locations. Brilliant strategy, but that also comes from a scale standpoint. I love it.
I think I would stress the need for the optimization of pricing and markdown today as never before. Because when you look at the last 3-4 years in retail, during COVID, it was all about getting the product in. You can reduce the numbers, you can reduce the assortments. You just need to get some sort of yeast or baking yeast or webcams or toilet paper on the shelves. And with the lead times and shipping delays, it was an issue. And then finally, all those ships that have sailed and were delayed reached the shore. And we got all this abundance of inventory. And it became the problem of what inventory you can move and what inventory should go to discounters right away or even to the landfill. Today, when we thought we started getting back to normal, right? And remember how much of the headlines about logistics and shipping getting back to normal we have seen over the last year, right? It was the scariest thing, right? Because it was like a thin skin of a very deep cut.
Yep.
You knew it would not, it has not healed completely.
Yeah.
We came to the situation today when the credit card debt is high. The interest on credit cards is huge. The job losses is massive. And all of that impacts people's ability to spend disposable income. And that reduces what and how people buy. And there's been lots of talk about resilient consumers, but resilient consumers flock towards discount stores or stores with a big sale, right? And it becomes the question of, you may have planned brilliantly, but the sales orders are falling down. What can you do? And what can you do is the last resort, is the last protection, the last defense, is to have the system of optimizing your markdowns rather than over marking down. Yep. Because that may be able to, that may help you to salvage that sheer amount of profit.
Absolutely.
The knowledge share here has been like absolutely unbelievable. I've been quiet and just my brain is literally on fire here. So really appreciate that. I want to ask you, I'm not sure if the answer is going to be any different from what you've already shared, but a segment of our audience are digital first organizations, native digital brands that sell online. And many of those organizations are now moving into multi-sales channels. So whether it's drop shipping for a retailer, selling in retail brick and mortar, certainly marketplace with Amazon and Walmart, certainly TikTok, you can't avoid that topic, which is top of mind for everybody. Are there any demand planning strategies when it comes to the diversification of inventory across different networks or different channels to be able to support multiple sales channel streams at a digital native brand that, again, maybe they were only concerned with like, hey, what inventory am I going to put in my 2-node e-commerce fulfillment network? Now I have to start thinking about, well, how am I going to support that target sort center and any other retail channel that I might be looking into? Any thoughts or advice on that?
Well, I'm the typical e-commerce shopper. I would not leave my home or my office for a store unless so urgent or unless there is a reason. I always prefer to buy whatever I can buy online. Having said that, 75% of goods are still sold through brick and mortar. So as much as we feel it to be nice and sexy solving the problems of e-commerce, we should always remember that the retail industry is not just e-commerce. And we see more and more of e-commerce brands opening stores. When you think about Amazon opening stores, that's a great example. We see different ways of handling it. A lot of furniture stores, for example, would put the samples on the floor, but then they still will order them online. And I think that's a brilliant model. West Elm uses it. When you come to West Elm, you place your order, it will be delivered, and maybe delivered to your house, maybe delivered to the stores. But you can try and touch and feel, and yet they can avoid the huge backlogs. And this is why Williams-Sonoma and West Elm are very successful in what they do, as well, of course, as having a proper retail planning tools and focus on replenishment and assortment planning. But I think that when you talk about e-commerce brands, mostly e-commerce brands, they have one advantage, which is they have good data. Mm-hmm. So leveraging that good data, spending time and effort to improve that data, and then implementing tools that are available today rather than spending 2 or 3 years developing your own and then having to maintain may be a good strategy. And I do understand that some of those tools have to be developed internally because they create a certain differentiation, a certain know-how. But I would question that just because you're a software company selling dog food or furniture or apparel, that you would be developing all the suite, all the items that we have discussed, because it will take you years and years and years. Mm-hmm. And you need to be efficient and profitable while you're doing it. So being very selective about what exists in the market today and only engaging in development if you think you can get a sufficient advantage. Because there is never lack of the projects, right? The technology resources will be busy no matter what, right? But figuring out what exists and what can be implemented within 6 months to get you that advantage, as opposed to wait for 3 years and then figure out how much you have to spend maintaining and upgrading and innovating in those tools. I think that's probably the main thing, the main message to the e-commerce brands.
It's awesome. And any opinions on, because you already touched on the ship from store strategy. So, the should ship from store, and I know a lot of the large brands are doing it as kind of a primary strategy. But our observation has been a little different, where shipping from store is inefficient. It's not really cost effective, right? And not every company can pull off that, the target experience of sort centers being able to take some of that demand. What's your observation from a trend standpoint, where is ship from store something that is peaking, or are we kind of pulling back at this point where e-commerce specifically being addressed in demand planning? How do you see that, or from an allocation perspective?
During COVID, everyone rushed to shipping at home and developing all kind of buy online, pick up in store, ship from store options and everything else. I think what we're seeing today is neither decline nor increase, but proliferation. And the question becomes, is shipping from store offering you an advantage or a disadvantage? And that has to do with several things, the size, the market, the penetration and density of the stores. We talked about Target. I think every person living in the US has Target within probably 15 to 30 miles. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
At the same time, there are lots of brands who may be predominantly Italian or predominantly Southern European, with a lesser stress on shipment and with a lesser expectations, because that's another thing that we have to take in mind. Amazon and Walmart have conditioned us to expect shipment next day and free shipments and free returns. So the question becomes, what is the right balance? And that right balance would be very different for different brands. I mentioned before, I think if someone says that one model is the best for everybody, that's not a model, it's religion, right? So I have no religion when it comes to retail. I believe in data. So it really comes to the analysis and looking at specific situation. I know very successful brands among our customers, such as Kiko Milano, who are shipping from the warehouse, and they do very robust and very well thought through replenishment and inventory management in their stores. And they base it on the market that they serve, and they are very, very successful. We have customers among retailers selling pet food in Europe and in the US. And one has always put the focus on e-commerce and the delivery online, and the other can always put the focus on the local stores because they're serving the market where internet is less stable or less used to e-commerce, and the customers have to go to town for the food shopping anyway, and it's more traditional for them to pick up something for the pet. And they have very different strategies, and they use different tools, and they use or different implementation of the same tools to approach it. So I don't think that there is ever one size fits all, but we do see the change in shipments strategy overall that goes towards reducing the brands, curtailing shipment for some brands, rethinking the strategy for other brands, and thinking more carefully about the business cases for the returns. Should you be returning in the store versus returning by email? Would it hurt the sales, or would it create an opportunity to sell something to the customer who returns in store? All of those things have to be taken into.
And then what do you do with those returns as well, right? Because that becomes a really key part of like how you manage the returns that, let's say, come to the store or be it online. You were mentioning during our prep call the strategies that AI can help in decision making around returns. Do you want to kind of expand a little bit upon that?
Of course, returns are not a good thing for the online retailers, right? First of all, depending on the product, some products can be refurbished and returned to stores. Other products may be opened and may not even be eligible for returning to stores, such as toys. They would have to be discarded. The store will still want it back to prevent fraud, but some of those items for the health reasons may go directly into the landfill as opposed to reselling. I think first and the most, thinking about returns as a strategy is important. And we know that for the e-commerce, returns create up to 30% drain on profitability because the customers go to the UPS or FedEx or post office to do the return as opposed to coming through the store, going all the way downstairs or upstairs to the customer service and picking up a big basket of things and saying, I'm returning this, but here's what I'm buying.
Yep.
Right. So that's an issue. One of the things I would mention is that I would start approaching the returns from implementing a digital twin and knowing exactly what do you have in your inventory. Because depending on when and how the return is scanned, you may have an option to avoid shipping everything into a warehouse and then shipping to different locations. You may start by saying certain items go directly to the discount or directly to the landfill. Other items, if they are unopened, may go directly to the store and be sold in the store. So there may be a possibility to rethink the whole network of shipment, but that, of course, would require first and the most seeing that return in real time.
Yep.
Whenever it's scanned, whatever that button is clicked and the form is created, as opposed to waiting for a day or two for all your keys to be updated and information coming to you. And by that time, you're looking in the rearview mirror.
Oh.
So implementing digital twin that senses demand is a very important step in addressing the returns intelligently. And we see more and more interest towards moving from that static planning to very dynamic planning, which is based on real-time data and sensing data within the 4 enterprise walls. The moment that the data comes in, the moment the pallet is scanned in a warehouse, the moment the products are unloaded in stores, the moment the return is filled in, you can get that decision delayed a little bit and making the more profitable decision in the end.
Exactly. And leaving it more to tribal knowledge at a warehouse level, or at the store level, right? So if something's being returned to the store, you don't want this user, if you have an assortment of 1 million SKUs, to know exactly what condition to grade something at, but you can keep it as simple as good, bad, and ugly. And that's where AI can make the decision that good is equal to, let's call it back in stock. And then you can see where the stock channel can go back in. Bad is equal to maybe refurbish for a certain good, but another one could be salvage. Another one could be damaged donation based on what the product happens to be. And then, ugly could translate into destroy or, send it right to the salvager, send it right to the certificate of destruction type of individual, rather than sending everything back to the warehouse to make the exact same decision. Now, there is some variability and AI takes time to learn, but I think we also get a cleaner supply chain out of that while saving money. Who doesn't want that?
Well, and think about making supply chain the force for good, which is what ToolsGroup defines as their mission. If you can reduce the amount of shipments, we're not just talking about saving money, but talking about saving CO2. And even if you reduce your shipments on half of your returns, you still may have a pretty substantial impact on the planet, as well as on your bottom line and your profit.
Makes sense.
Your insights have been absolutely amazing. Before we let you go, would definitely love to hear from you. What future trends or innovation are you watching carefully? You most excited about in the coming year or two?
I started talking about the digital twin. What I'm the most excited about is the move from the static planning to dynamic planning, and then to what we call navigation through supply chain. And I would talk a little bit about navigation, because dynamic, it's using real-time data, it's adjusting your tools for real-time data, it's factoring in weather conditions and real-time inventory data and getting better results. But in the end, that's the stepping stone towards that navigation approach. When you drive, you use Google Drive or Waze, which is in essence the common interface, and probably multiple engines behind that optimize your route. And we think there is an opportunity to create the same approach in supply chain, where you may have several different engines optimizing your production planning, your replenishment, your assortment, your order management, constantly rooting every single decision in the financial information. So having connect to the financial systems and factoring financial outcomes into your final decision. And while it would not take humans out of supply chain, it may minimize the amount of decisions humans make, or it may provide you with a choice of, here's 3 bad options, choose the one that is the best of bad options, like exactly like it happens when you drive and there is an accident in front of you, right? And there is not much that the system can do, but it can tell you, well, you can take that route and, save 7 minutes so you can stand here and spend time. So I think that's what excites me the most, reducing the amount of difficult, unproductive work made by human beings and focusing humans on more strategic discussions. If you have good tools for optimizing your network, if you have good tools for connecting your planning and execution, you can spend more time on how you make this more strategic discussions about who your suppliers are, what gets automated next, how you address questionable cases, how you address disruptions, and hopefully making our supply chains a little bit more efficient and sustainable.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
digital twin sounding really good to us right about now. And I can tell you in the warehousing space, we are already starting to see some of that. And to your point, all of them, as let's call them, these twin workers. So warehouses have individual workers that are doing digital sims. Now the question is, can everything, right, from demand planning to, transportation to, inventory allocation, can they all work together to then feed into the financial decision making, right? So that sounds like a good future to us. And yeah, it won't remove all the humans, but it will definitely make the human decision making part much easier.
Exactly. And the same as in a warehouse, bringing goods to people turns out to be more efficient for the company and kind on human beings. The
Absolutely.
same way bringing data to people and decisions to people rather than having people looking for data and looking for those suboptimal decisions, make it much more efficient.
Oh, absolutely. Really looking forward to this future.
Absolutely. Ina, thank you so much for joining us today in such a wonderful conversation. We will share links in the show notes where everyone could go to learn more about ToolsGroup, where they could go to follow you on social media. So everyone, please take a look at those show notes so you could learn where to find more information. So again, I just wanted to thank you for joining us. An absolutely beautiful conversation.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Nina. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to talk to more players in the industry about how we can work together to make supply chain the force for good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ, and I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the Ecom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the Ecom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the Ecom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference in logistics together.